Northern wind cut across the barracks training grounds, scuffing dead leaves into spirals. Jiang Eon sat straight behind the desk, fingertips tapping the wood. The candle flame danced in those calm eyes.
Slaughtering another core formation greater demon. That is not realistic.
His voice stayed low, but it pushed back against the wind moaning outside.
But cowing a fiend that is strayed into our territory, forcing it to pull back from Azure province, that can serve as a proper test.
Nero Yule stood with hands lowered, his bearing as unhurried as still water.
He knew, with his master's cultivation, leaving the city wasn't necessary. Just meditating in the commander's manor would make that old Fox clan creature think twice. Yet, the master insisted on sending Soren. This wasn't for the other generals. It was the master himself wanting to see what skill this young commander, so praised by Elder Chen, really had. Depart for the capital in 5 days.
Jiang Eon tilted his chin.
General Shen must not be late.
Soren obeys.
He stood, fist clasped, turned. His profound armor sliced a cold arc of light through the candle glow.
His mind already moved to Cypress Cloud County. To that minor Zari he'd sent off with 4 unities true prime. Even without this command, Soren would have made the trip to Northcliff sooner or later.
Once the figure in profound armor disappeared past the courtyard gate, Theron poked his head from the kitchen.
Did he not ask a single question about the junior sister? Niroyo blinked, running back the exchange in his mind. No inquiry at all.
The night was thick as pooled ink. In the commandant's secondary residence, a single lamp burned dim amber. Larry clutched the Grimwolf mantle, scurrying into the courtyard. She caught her breath, then tapped carefully at the door.
Is ni Esdrol Shendin?
The door slid open without a sound. Larry held out the great cloak on reflex, but her voice froze. She stared at the beautiful young woman standing there, dumbstruck. Leora took the mantle with ease, her slim fingers refolding it neatly out of habit. Her movements were soft, unhurried, familiar.
Soren isn't here. I'll pass it on.
Thank you, older sister.
Larry, flustered, tore her eyes from Leora's face. Even raised inside the demon suppression division, she'd never seen a woman so gentle and lovely.
It is late. Have you eaten? Stay and eat with me.
Leora tilted her head, smiling, shifting aside a little. Dim lamplight brushed her shoulder, catching the embroidered wolf, devouring motif under her fingers. She traced the silk threads lightly. The cloak had been scrubbed spotless, but the faintest hint of fiend blood still clung to the weave. That fit her picture of the young man exactly. Larry clenched her sleeves. Then she caught steady footfalls approaching from behind. Face flushing, she shook her head.
My brother's waiting.
She spun, stole a quick glance at the closing silhouette of profound armor, then fled the courtyard like a spooked fawn. Soren pulled his gaze back, indifferent, and walked through the door. The crimson mantle came unfastened, and Lyra caught it with practiced ease. She turned, pulled out a chair for him, her tone lightly scolding.
That was just for handing over your clothes. Now sit, eat. I am starving.
On the table, a clay pot of braised lamb ribs burbled, steam rolling. Rich fat aroma tangled with burning pine wood, misting under the amber lamp. The broth was creamy, the ribs so tender they threatened to slip off the bone. Steam blurred Leorda's face. Soren sat.
I heard you failed to coalesce your core, he asked.
Leora rolled her eyes, stabbed a rib viciously, and dropped it into his bowl, sauce splashing the white porcelain.
3 months gone, and you are still insufferable.
This time, no crowd of eyes watched them. Soren picked up the rib, chewing slowly. That spoiled last meal in Cypress Cloud County finally tasted right again. The meat melted, the broth rich, fat dissolving with a faint caramel sweetness.
Stop staring.
Soren lifted his bowl of hot broth.
Fine. I won't look.
Leora looked away and grabbed her chopsticks. She had a pile of questions Yang commandery, his quick promotion, the demon clans. But dinner came first. Chopsticks rose and fell fast. Not until only a slick of broth remained did Leora wipe her mouth, satisfied, massaging her belly.
Thought once you made general, your palate would get pickier.
Barely appointed. Haven't had the chance to enjoy it yet.
Soren rose and sat on the bed's edge.
So, how'd it happen?
Leora couldn't hold back the wonder. She knew Vane wouldn't just let Soren soak in baths. From commandant to general of demon suppression in months. It made no sense. Soren's eyes stayed calm.
Same way as before.
Silence.
Leora's mind snapped back to Cypress Cloud County, leaving at dawn, returning at dusk. Clothes always bloody. That tired line between his brows when he pushed through the door each night.
Light words, but underneath countless life or death fights. Her throat tightened. The fiend Soren killed to catch the general's eyes were no ordinary beasts. Cultivation leaps like this. No wonder some whispered he was a greater demon in human skin. Then her thoughts circled back to herself. Leora lowered her lashes, and a thread of hidden bleakness crept into her voice.
I wasted a precious opportunity.
In front of the others, she smiled like nothing was wrong. But here with Soren, she could drop the act. He'd seen her worse.
Lacking talent.
It is what it is.
Soren shook his head, his tone as flat as talking about the weather.
He meant to console. He knew that bitter taste too well, needing more chances and more time.
Leora found no words, just silence. Yet when she looked up, she saw nothing but sincerity on his face. No mockery. Leora rubbed her eyes, nose reddening, yet her heart felt lighter.
All right. Soren didn't waste time on jokes. If lacking talent was just true, then you did what you could.
The lamp flickered in her eyes. She steadied her breathing.
So, what is Great General Shen doing next?
Soren shed the profound armor and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Moonlight slipped through the window lattice, a silver frost line across his face.
Back to Cypress Cloud County.
Leora caught on, blurting in surprise.
Master means to test you with that old fox clan.
A candle wick popped. Her chest tightened, words quickening.
Its cultivation might not be core formation, but it is no Ching-chiu Fiend. It studied under Ching-chiu, came back in triumph, devious methods. No common demon can match it.
She leaned forward, voice dropping.
If senior sister Jiang went herself, the Fox clan would likely back off quietly, out of respect. But you just got promoted to Grand General. It might not give you the same courtesies.
Soren pillowed his arms behind his head, moonlight cold on his indifferent brows. He didn't argue.
He'd never planned on relying on this profound armor to scare the creature.
The next day, first light broke. The sovereign temporarily assigned his 2 personal deputy generals to Soren and lent him his own mount, letting the young man get familiar with the retinue that'd one day be his. Only when those figures disappeared where the official road met the horizon did the sovereign spin on his heel. He strode toward the commander's manor. His gait was that of a meteor, swift and violent. Armor scales clashed at his waist. Every step rang with barely restrained fury. The moment he stormed into the inner courtyard, his voice rolled forth. No greeting, no preamble, just a blast of heat.
This old man can't fathom it. He is the demon, quelling Grand General of my Riverside commandery. Why is this trial being arranged with no regard for my opinion?
Jiang Eon rose to greet him. His expression stayed unhurried, a light shake of his head.
If he can't intimidate even one Zari at the peak of core formation, what will Soren use to help you safeguard Riverside commandery?
Jiang Eon, spare me your clever sophistry.
The sovereign's eyes narrowed to slits. The armor at his waist quivered with his rage, giving off a fine, piercing metallic hum.
That Zari left the Shen, took a master in Ching-chiu, and now it is back roaming its old territory. A triumphant homecoming. Its proudest, most glorious moment. You refused to go. You refused to send your own disciple. Yet you pushed the demon-quelling Grand General. I personally chose to provoke this mess.
He stepped forward. His robe hem snapped. His voice cranked up another notch.
What are you plotting? His own cub was gold. Other men's children were mud. One misstep here would offend a major power, Ching-chiu, and that was putting it lightly.
Lower your voice.
Jiang Eon's smile faded. His gaze drifted toward the 2 women across the room. Ji, Wang Fei, as elegant as ever, held a jet-black chess piece between her fingertips. Her eyes rested on the young woman opposite her, tender patient. Azure sat in silence, peerless in her immortal grace. Her gaze was a deep winter lake, cold and impossibly clear. Her long, pale hand descended. Black stones linked. A line of 5. The click of stone striking jade board cut the quiet like a knife. Ding. That placement was a statement, cold, indifferent. A drop of ice water falling into a deep pool. Ji, Wang Fei covered her red lips. Her laugh held a touch of helplessness.
Q-lan, That is not how Go is played.
Azure had already withdrawn her hand. She didn't spare the board another glance.
She had no time for music, chess, calligraphy, or painting. By her rules, victory and defeat were already decided. The others' rules, they meant nothing.
Jiang Eon settled his gaze back on the sovereign. His tone was flat, unruffled.
Chulon has another critical task. I must remain here personally to guard her. You know exactly how strong she is. Staying in the same compound, even I can't afford to divide my attention.
He paused.
Besides, to be a demon-quelling Grand General, strength alone isn't enough. He must learn how to deal with fiends. This is a good opportunity. It is merely a disciple of Ching-chiu. If he truly offends the sect, this Jiang, unworthy as I am, still possesses a sliver of face.
At this, the sovereign huffed, a cold, hard sound. He stopped pressing.
Soren's crisp, decisive methods had earned genuine appreciation. The thought of trouble brushing that young man made the sovereign profoundly irritated. Now he had the High Marshal Valerius's personal pledge. He could grudgingly be satisfied.
Then he recalled the first half of Jiang Eon's words. His eyes shot an icy glare.
Grand Commander, with that disposition of yours, being forsaken by kin and abandoned by allies is only a matter of time.
To the sovereign, every man's child was molded from mud. Exalted position bred instinctive mistrust. When he found a heaven, sent genius, he never bothered with lectures. He executed the one creature that could influence her instead, that Goldensilk simian. In a single month, Azure learned never to pause. Not even for an instant. Now, with no reinforcements in sight, Jiang Eon planned to exploit this disciple he'd raised since childhood. To seek aid beyond the imperial court rather than gambling everything on her breakthrough, the sovereign turned, slow and deliberate.
This old man has no doubt at all. If Azure Province weathers this demon calamity intact, that Void Frost's seven-bane sword intent will punch scores of holes clean through you.
Jiang Eon's smile was mild.
No matter, I have my yin spirit. A mere physical body, she is welcome to flence it into mince to vent her fury.
Spoken so lightly, a martial immortal could anchor divine sense to a yin spirit, sure, but a yin spirit still needed a vessel. It was nowhere near as trivial as he made it sound. Yet, as Marshal Veritas, he had one task. Ensure the vast 12 domains were not ravaged by fiends. Everything else could be cast aside. Before the sovereign left, he couldn't help himself. He threw one last remark through whispered sound transmission. His tongue had loosened.
Prince Ji is debauched beyond measure, famed across Daxian, for siring offspring the realm over. I find Prince Ching-chiu no virtuous man either.
He paused. His tone dropped lower.
Ji, Wang Fei is the inheritor of an immortal sect, domineering by nature. Otherwise the prince's manor wouldn't count dozens of princesses, and but a single young lord. She might indeed summon a primordial chaos grandmaster, but she is also the sort who won't lose her hawk until she sees the hair. Grand Commander, take care.
Yangan Commandery, Cypress Cloud County. Months ago, 4 great demonic calamities plagued this land. Sheriff Shen eliminated 2. The Demon Suppression Division moved in fast. City gates were sealed. Officers from the inner camp fanned out, scouring the area. Powerful fiends with name and reputation fled at the rumors. Unlucky stragglers caught in a demon, binding chain lost their heads. 3 full months passed. The officers were still here. Only one name remained, Northcliffe. No one had set foot there. Outside the city gates, Vane stood in grim silence. Grimwolf mantle draped his shoulders. A retinue stood arrayed behind him. He'd been the first Demon Suppression Division lieutenant to make contact with Cypress Cloud County. He knew it better than anyone. It was Vane who had halted the inner camp's purge of Northcliffe. He'd brandished a letter from Leora to do it.
It has been a long time since I last saw a Demon Suppression Grand General, with my own eyes.
His breath quickened. He straightened his back by instinct and brushed the dust from his great cloak. Ilara sighed.
The boy fancied himself a true lieutenant now. Completely forgot he was the direct heir of House Plum. Other first-rate factions didn't necessarily boast a core formation cultivator. Theirs stood foremost among the 4 surnames and 5 sects. Their ancestor had attained that very realm. Must he act so provincial?
Vane tilted his head toward Ilara.
I am only curious which one it is. If it is Yunkin Commandery's Grand General, he'll probably just trade a few words with Zari. But if Lord Jiang himself came, Perhaps we'll see him test his hand.
He never finished. Ilara kicked him, sharp. She lowered her voice.
They're here.
The tremor reached them through the ground first. A deep, hammering cadence of hooves rolled in from the distant road. Each beat struck like a blow to the chest. 4 demon steeds swept in like streaks of light. At the front, a crimson, maned horse blazed as if sculpted from living fire. Its mane and tail whipped into a roiling banner of blood-hued flames in the gale. 4 riders. Yet they pounded forward with the suffocating weight of a full army bearing down. Dust erupted on both sides of the official road in yellow dragon coils. Gravel and crushed stones snapped under iron shoes, ricocheting wildly. The withered grass along the path lay flattened.
Elder General Chen.
Vane's eyes flew wide. In the time it took to blink, the 4 riders were on them. Hooves reared high and slammed to earth with a crack of shattered stone. 3 demon steeds snorted plumes of white steam. Muscles still rolled beneath their hides. A young man in ebonlight, mystic armor dismounted, his crimson mantle unfurled behind him. A blood-soaked war banner snapping in the wind. 2 veteran officers of Riverside Commandery stepped forward to take the reins of the Red Stallion.
General Shen, shall we rest a moment and summon someone to report the situation?
No need. I am pressed for time.
Soren strode through the crowd. His pace was unhurried. His expression was so placid that silence fell like a blade. Iron boots struck the bluestone street. With each step, the dust packed between the stones puffed upward in tiny plumes. It spun into fine gray mist in the afternoon sunlight. Leora followed the young man in silence. Her gaze swept the familiar streets. Her mind drifted.
Had the Fox clan ever imagined this? A mere 3 months later, she was setting foot on her homeland again. And the man walking before her, he was once nothing more than a paltry sheriff. Right under their noses.
Vane clutched his meticulously prepared dossier. His mouth was parched. He wanted to step forward, make his presence known, but the Grand General showed no intention of questioning anyone. He just stared at those 2 figures, dumbfounded. He had guessed through all 12 Grand Generals, and he'd failed to guess a single goddamn one. Who could have imagined that Azure Province held a General Shen? No need for introductions. Damn it. This was the man's own territory.
Sis!
Ilara answered vaguely. Her gaze had long since drifted. It was fixed on that silhouette in its profound armor. From South Street to North Street, the demon suppression Grand General kept walking. No pause. Straight out of the city. More and more townsfolk recognized that face, and it set all of Cypress Cloud County ablaze. Not even the officers' cold glares could stamp out the uproar. The Forest family patriarch shoved through the crowd, belly jostling. His voice shook.
That's my daughter. That's Nature's Droshan.
Ever since learning Azari had been in his home, that his daughter had been switched, he'd grown far more timid. He'd never dared breathe a word of her identity to the imperial court. But now, as Leora passed by and gave him a furtive wink, he couldn't hold it in. The words just burst out. A roadside pancake vendor stumbled, shoved by an officer. Red-faced and thick-necked, he yanked his cart back.
What are you shoving me for? Nate the Strollshend loves my pancakes. Always eats 2.
The officer pushed him back to the roadside, deadpan, hesitated.
Give me 1 too.
Outside the city, the clamor died, the air falling quiet once more. Northcliff wasn't demon territory, it fell under Azure Province's jurisdiction. Only because the county had never reported a demonic calamity had that Fox clan been left undisturbed until now. The 2 lieutenant adjutants followed the young man, their gazes on his back, their expressions different. Ho-chun had followed the sovereign for over 2 centuries. Even tempered 3 times by the martial temple, he'd only reached core formation, a stir of emotion, sure, but nothing earth-shattering. Liu Yu Shen was different. He'd served the sovereign since youth, his cultivation at the peak of condensed core, hair white now, skin like withered bark. If not for Soren, he'd be the foremost candidate to succeed the Grand General. Ho-chun glanced at him. Liu Yu Chuen forced a smile, tightened his grip on his great halberd. His voice dropped to a mosquito's hum.
The old master's eye for people. Never wrong.
He couldn't tell if he was reassuring Ho-chun or himself. Then he gathered his spirit and quickened his pace.
General Shen, before we departed, the old master told us to remind you. This Zari has serious backing. Don't take this lightly. If you can settle this without blades, Best not to draw blood.
Soren gazed at the towering cliff ahead.
Fine.
His hand brushed the silver bell token at his waist. A faint, crystalline chime rippled out, a single drop falling into a still lake. The air around his palm quivered. Visible ripples spread. The roadside wild grass pressed flat by the soundless wave. From the void, a bow of archaic design slowly materialized. Unstrung, yet it stirred muffled rumbles of wind and thunder, like some titanic beast slumbering through eons, letting out a low, panting breath. The celestial Sunday, piercing bow settled silently into his hand. Leora watched in silence. That familiar understanding settled in. Yes, this was still the same Soren. High on the cliff, the cave dripped with opulence. Tiger pelts draped the stone seat. The white-robed middle-aged man reclined in a beauty's arms, 4 delicate hands kneading his shoulders and back. Below, a row of figures knelt, all transformed Zari. An old man trembled, his face full of longing.
Grand uncle, might we have the fortune to follow you to Ching-chiu? Broaden our horizons.
The white-robed man yawned. A corner of his lips curled, a silent sneer. A pack of initial realm, minor demons from a desolate backwater. He rose slowly, paced to the cave entrance. Mountain wind poured in, white robes billowing. His gaze drifted down the mountain. Those demon suppression division runners still waited there like docile servants. No invitation letter yet. Marshal Veritas or some demon, suppressing general, someone of status, should come and politely escort him out. The thought wasn't finished. His pupils constricted. A white-hot sun expanded in his eyes, madly. The sky split apart. A white-lit arrow tore through the clouds. A falling sun slammed onto the high cliff. Rock strata vaporized. White radiance swallowed everything. Half the cliff disintegrated into dust in silence. Before the debris could scatter, the dense light melted it into magma, instantly evaporated. A bell toll exploded. The spirit bronze bell at the white-robed man's waist erupted with a phantom silhouette, enveloping him entirely. The phantom trembled and rang violently. Light patterns spider-webbed across it, thinning to near transparency. When the white radiance cleared, he looked back. The cave abode was a heap of rubble. Not one living Fox clan remained.
This is the invitation your demon suppression division presents to me?
He stepped into the air. Cold intent solidified, piercing the mountain wind like ice spikes.
You refuse the face I grant you.
His voice icy cold, brief, a blade slicing through frozen ice. His azure jade sword shot out with a hiss, settling beneath his feet. At the base of the cliff, Soren held his bow, profound armor's red cape snapping in the wind. He watched the figure tread air, calm.
He drew his blade first.
Ho-chan and Liu Yu, Xuen quivered. Their throats burned. They couldn't speak. Then Soren vanished, leaving only a faint mark stirred by a breeze. Zari's pupils shrank. He formed a hand seal.
Azure Sunday Sword.
The sapphire jade blade under his feet split into 3. 2 Dao blade shadows struck from left and right, sword chi tearing eerie white rifts across the sky. Soren materialized right in the center of those rifts. Savage demonic chi burst from him, crimson, viscous, a tidal wave flooding the heavens. Demonic chi condensed into a sword. The yin-yang Dao sword took shape, a yin-yang fish revolving. Crimson lightning crackled, tearing the air, killing intent thick as blood. Both swords struck. The Dao blade slashed horizontally. The twin azure Sunday swords shattered like paper, turned to dust. The Dao blade kept going, soaring upward to pierce Sari's face. The horizon dyed pale red. The crimson sword tip collided with the spirit bronze bell's phantom that erupted again. The sword hummed. The phantom staggered back. Zari's expression remained indifferent, but deep in his pupils, fury turned to magma. With a thought, a smooth jade pill emerged silently. Then, a second, a third. All 12 Ching-chiu outer elixirs revolved slowly around him, each exuding the profound aura of perfected core formation, a celestial ring guarding him. As jade light flowed, the spirit bronze bell's phantom abruptly solidified, indestructible. The crimson Dao sword was blocked outside the phantom, sword tip trembling, unable to advance an inch.
Soul-quelling celestial bell.
Zari pressed his palm toward the void.
In prison.
The spirit bronze bell shot from his waist, expanding in the wind. A huge green bronze bell, 10 feet tall, descended with a boom, swallowing Soren whole. The earth trembled. As the bell landed, sound waves radiated, tangible ripples. Grass and trees flattened. Sand and stones flew. Liu Yu, Chuen's face went deathly pale. Ho-chun's bones turned cold. Leora's breath caught.
A crude martial artist dares raise a hand against me.
Zari stood on his sapphire jade blade, white robes fluttering. He looked down at the woman below and sneered.
Leora, I gave you face once. There won't be a second time.
He formed another hand seal.
Smelt his soul.
The green bronze bell body surged with flowing light. A violent boom erupted. The massive commotion turned the two deputy generals' faces ghastly pale. In the sky, Zari's expression changed drastically. This noise, not from his hand seal. A second boom tore through the firmament. The green bronze bell smashed apart from the inside. Fragments shot out. An arm in profound armor thrust out, fist clenched. 5 fingers hooked the edge of a crack, tore. The thick bell wall ripped open. A gaping hole. The sound of shattering, ear-piercing. Soren walked out, indifferent. Profound armor, spotless. His form turned to a clear breeze, reappearing right in front of Zari. The spirit bronze bell shattered, the phantom around Zari collapsing. The crimson Dao sword thrust at his face. Zari hurriedly flung out an outer elixir to block. Sword and elixir collided. A metallic explosion. The real crisis came from the side. An elbow strike wrapped in black iron arm. Guard smashed into his eye socket. Only now did Zari fully comprehend the force that had shattered his soul, quelling celestial bell. His skull cracked, shattered. His eyeball burst into a mist of blood. Half his lips wriggled, desperately chanting.
Jade immortal rejuvenation art.
Rich, warm white light covered his head. The azure jade sword beneath his feet carried him retreating madly. Soren drew his saber. Green light surged. An invisible ripple, several meters wide, swept across the sky. A small portion of Zari's body was grazed by that ripple. Soundlessly, like papier-mâché, the spirit bronze bell was already broken. Soren walked over and lifted Zari's corpse. It had already reverted. Fur, claws, the whole mangled mess. He tore out the fiend core, pulled free the vitality chi from the heart tip, yanked the azure jade sword from its death grip, and fished a lunar silver spatial pouch from the folds of its robe. Then he walked back to the base of the cliff and shoved the body at his 2 deputies.
Let's go.
The deputies clutched the corpse. Their hands burned where they touched it. Neither could find a single word. The blame Jiang Eon High Marshal Valerius would have to swallow. And Soren handed it over like a sack of spoiled grain. Soren glanced back. A beat of genuine confusion crossed his face.
I did warn them.
Leora's mind flicked back to that arrow from the heaven. Sundering Sunday bow, 20+ lives stacked as kindling.
Yeah.
She watched Soren already striding toward the city gates. Back straight, pace unhurried. She murmured, more to herself than anyone.
You are getting close. Senior sister Azure level close.
Soren thought it over, shook his head.
Not yet.
His fingers brushed the 12 Ching-chiu outer elixirs. The jade was warm, slick with a coolness that seeped straight into the bone. Nothing like the heavenly demon outer pill coiled inside him. That thing was condensed from jade dew, makeshift, crude. These were real, forged and refined by masters who knew what they were doing. His gaze sharpened. The heavenly demon outer pill sat hidden in his sea of chi, its fiendish power soaking through his flesh and bones. It skirted the major meridians, sure, but it still had to move through his body. The Ching-chiu outer elixir, completely different, summoned in open air, stores cultivation, commands artifacts, stays separate from the body's pathways. In a real emergency, you could detonate one and cripple an enemy. 2 entirely separate arts. That young fox heard the words outer pill and shoved Serpent Fiend into a blender of bad guesses. What they slapped together had 0 resemblance to true Ching-chiu craftsmanship. No wonder it was crawling with hidden dangers. Soren pulled his thoughts back and slipped the silver shimmer pouch into his sleeve. The grudge, essence of the Ching-chiu Hu, was bound to him now. That meant he could refine and evolve martial arts without veering too far into the abyss.
Good enough.
The panel shimmered up at a thought. His eyes locked onto 4 characters, yin, yang, true intent. Zari's flying sword routine replayed in his mind. The arc, the lethality, the way it nearly hummed with something just out of reach. Soren didn't hesitate. He burned 1,000 years of lifespan, condensed a primordial treasure crystal, and funneled the fiend's lifespan straight into yin, yang true intent. His spirit plunged. The sea of chi swallowed him whole. Grudges boiled up from the deep dark. The mountain lord's roar, the serpent fiend's hiss, the white deer's whisper, Zari's low, guttural chanting. A wave of voices crashed in from all sides, ripping at his consciousness. Soren sat cross-legged in the void, unmoving. He used his spirit like a blade, carved into that flood of noise, split it open, peeled apart the layers. Dross, fell away. Essence stayed. Deduction had no shortcut. You kept one sliver of yourself, sharp and lucid, while the chaos raged. Days bled into years. The phantom of the yin yang dao sword hung above the sea of qi. The yin yang fish swam their slow, endless loop. Black and white flickered in rhythm, like the breath before creation split. The fiend congregation bickered. The Ching-chiu Yao stood apart, emerald pupils fixed on the Dao Blade's phantom. It narrowed its eyes. Then it walked to Soren's side.
A dragon in the water is yin. A tiger in the mountains is yang. They carry both attributes, plus the hidden current of dragon-tiger harmony.
It paused, gaze steady on the spinning fish.
Seal them into the yin-yang fish. Use the grudges as firewood. The true intent as your forge. Smelt them into a real dragon-tiger manifestation.
Soren pressed 2 fingers together and pointed. The yin-yang Dao sword detonated with light. The yin-yang fish swelled, burst into twin vortexes that swallowed the mountain lord's tiger form and the serpent fiend's dragon shadow whole. The dragon's roar rolled like thunder through distant mountains. The tiger's howl cut cold as a bell from the 9 netherworld. The Dao blade shook. On its surface, the 2 grudges slammed together, bit, coiled. Each impact sent rings ripping through the sea of qi. The walls boomed like a struck spirit bronze bell. Blue veins ridged Soren's temples. He crushed his spirit force down onto the Dao blade's shadow. 1 dragon, 1 tiger, churning inside the yin-yang fish. He didn't erase their grudges. He used them. Mirrors to watch the shifts of yin and yang. Silence stretched. On the Dao blade, the dragon and tiger moved without violence. Head to tail, slow swimming, breathing in sync with Soren's heartbeat. The dragon's roar became a deep thrum. The tiger's howl became respiration. The Ching-chiu Yo released them. The Dao blade settled back to its original shape. Soren's eyes stayed shut. Then, the dragon's roar and the tiger's howl tore out of the Dao blade together. The sea of qi bucked under that sound. The yin-yang fish exploded into a billion splinters of light. When they reassembled, a dragon and a tiger coiled on either side of the blade, scales razored, claws hooked, majesty crashing upward.
Condensing peel to polarity dragon. Tiger true intent.
Insight poured in like a vein had been opened straight into his mind. Soren's eyes opened. A flash of genuine shock punched through the calm.
Only 200 years.
Zari had taken White Cloud Abbey's secret true intent and kicked it onto an entirely new plane. Shanjun Jomo was the kindling. Zari's own mind and perception were the blade that finished the cut.
He'd needed 1200 years to perfect yin. Yang true intent. This time, he'd dug up treasure.
His mouth twitched. Leora caught it, glancing sideways.
What? He told it.
Soren spun the silver shimmer pouch on his finger.
Nothing, just admiring the craftsmanship.
It does come from a faction that steamrolls a whole region.
Leora's smile was light, but something pulled at the corners. She hesitated.
I want to go home. See, my father.
She paused.
Come with me? He really wants to thank you, face to face.
Another time. I am heading back to Azure province soon.
Soren's refusal was soft, final. A flicker of shadow crossed Leora's eyes, there and gone. She held the smile.
Then when you get back from the imperial capital, I'll cook for you again.
He watched her figure vanish around the corner, then let his gaze drop. The core condensation method was close. He'd just hauled in a fat stack of Fiend's lifespan, and Azure's last warning still rang in his skull. Restore the Sunforged treasure furnace. Fully. The Fiend's lifespan surged, flooding into the wind. Thunder Sunday forged scripture. This part was pure martial internal art. Demon beast, crystallite, couldn't touch it.
Fine.
His account still held over 10,000 years. Under that weight, the barriers of more than 40 major acupoints shattered like dry rot. Notifications flickered past, faster than he could track. Muffled cracks tore through Soren's body in waves. Dark crimson meridians crawled outward from his dantian, magma-hot tidal. When the final major acupoint blew open, every single acupoint, 300 and change, resonated at once. A low, bone, deep hum. Inside the sea of qi, the furnace fire punched skyward. Dark red flame coiled around the heavenly demon outer pill, pressing it down, sealing it in a cage of heat. True intent runes ignited across the furnace walls, layer by layer, locking the fiend core dead center. The outer pill trembled, then went still, docile. Soren breathed out. The dark crimson veins sank back into his body. His skin returned to normal. Only the faintest glint of cooling ember remained at the bottom of his eyes. Over 2,000 years of lifespan. one layer of suppression force.
Looked like a loss on paper, but walking a Fiend's martial path meant picking up rot you couldn't name. With a furnace this clean as foundation. No loss at all.
He dropped his gaze to the panel.
Remaining Fiend's lifespan, 10,735 years.
The numbers hit his chest like a second heartbeat. Since the day he crossed over, when had he ever fought this rich? Once sky-devouring pure absorption landed in his hands, he wouldn't just break core formation. He'd take a bite out of primordial chaos grandmaster first. Just to see.
Soren retrieved the fox demon inner core, tipped his head back, and swallowed. The heavenly demon outer pill swelled to full completion. He stood, pushed the door open, and walked out. At the alley mouth, Ho Chun and Lu Yu, Xuen waited with 2 crimson steeds. Their faces were tight, fingers clenched white on the duty reports. They traded a look, ground their teeth. Jiang Eon, High Marshal Valerius, stared at the Sovereign Elder. His gaze was dark. The Sovereign Elder stared back, expression utterly unreadable. The Sovereign met his stare, expression unreadable.
I wonder just what do you imagine this old man should be reminding you of? A demon suppression general killing a core formation Zari. Is that not perfectly ordinary?
A pause.
Or perhaps Jiang Eon High Marshal Valerius has had a change of heart, afraid to carry this particular trouble for General Soren after all.
Try and choke me with your words all you want.
Jiang Eon's voice came out flat, measured. His breathing steadied, but deep in his eyes a cold light churned.
This Jiang has never swallowed his own promises.
If this matter leaked, mere face couldn't patch the hole. He'd need to be ready to strike, had already braced for the worst. The clang of conflict outside filtered through the room. A faint curve touched Azure's lips. Gone so fast, even the Ji, Wang Fei seated opposite, caught nothing. Her face settled back into its usual stillness. Ji Wang Fei studied the woman across from her, calculations already locked in place. She had planned on 5 days to observe this sharpest blade of Azure province. 2.5 days in, and the conclusion was already clear. In temperament, in bearing, she stood at the pinnacle of Da Shen. More than that, she was likely to become a primordial chaos grandmaster. In Ching-chiu, Ji Wang Fei knew better than anyone what that meant. The moment this person broke through, her standing would flip heaven and earth. Ji Wang Fu would forfeit all footing to bargain.
Lan.
Ji, Wang Fei's voice lifted into a smile.
Since your colleague has returned, shall we set out for the capital at once?
Outside, verdant city. Winter wind raked the desolate plain, snapping the banners above the city walls. Ji Wang Fei's silhouette disappeared behind the ornate carriage curtains. She settled in, then lifted one corner, smiling at Jiang Eon.
Jiang Eon High Marshal Valerius, rest assured. This princess will do everything she can to ease Azure province's burdens.
Much obliged for the trouble you're taking.
Jiang Eon's smile held all the right politeness. He turned, and the warmth in his eyes guttered out. Cold steel flickered there instead.
That woman never loosed her hawk without sighting the hare. He'd lived long enough to know the type, and he'd spent years pouring everything into raising this disciple. Did she think he'd let someone pluck her away so easily? The tidings from the imperial capital might not keep Ji Wang Fei half as composed as she looked right now. This was a game of nerve. Fine, he could hold his.
He gathered himself and looked past the carriage. Soren sat straight on horseback. The ebonlight mystic armor threw back a cold metallic gleam under the thin winter sun. Wind caught a corner of his crimson mantle, snapping it like a standard. The horse's breath plumed into fog. Its hooves pawed the frozen earth in dull, heavy thuds. Same young man who dismissed the Ching-chiu disciples with a single line in his report. The deputy general's voice had still been thick with disbelief when he gave the account. They'd never even gotten a chance to strike. Jiang Eon's eyes narrowed. The profound armor caught the light with a deep, dark sheen that sharpened the handsome face beneath into something fierce and striking. Tiny Azure province, after Azure herself, had coughed up yet another young prodigy. If not for the demon calamity bearing down, those two, given time to ripen, could have guaranteed Azure province 1,000 years of calm. Fortune refused to play along.
Still, carrying a black pot for someone like this, worth it. If it drew the imperial court's eye to him early, bought him a measure of regard, all the better.
Jiang Eon stepped forward. His voice he pitched just loud enough to reach the ears behind the curtains.
I must trouble General Soren to escort Ji Wang Fei back to the capital.
He cupped his hands, brief and formal. then turned and strode back toward Verdant City. His dark cape snapped behind him. The heavy gates groaned shut. Soren's brow lifted inside that carriage. Alongside Ji Wangfei sat an expert who could send the young fiend king bolting in terror.
What escort did they need from him?
The carriage curtains stirred. Ji Wangfei lifted the drapes, and shadows carved across Soren's young face. The stark lines of his profile thrown into relief by the armor's rigid angles, the play of light and shadow lending him both a youth's fine-boned handsomeness and the tempered cold of the battlefield.
Her gaze swept over the demon suppression general's profound armor, interest waning. So young, and already shielding an entire commandery. His future accomplishments probably wouldn't fall short of Azure's. But here in Ching-chiu, primordial chaos grandmaster and martial immortal, might both occupy the fourth realm. Yet, the treatment they received stood worlds apart. A martial immortal, no matter how powerful, guarded one corner for centuries, barely worth befriending. A primordial chaos grandmaster was something else entirely. That kind of powerhouse could sustain full battle strength anywhere and resolve nearly any trouble. Case in point, a promise thin as smoke had been enough to make this martial immortal of Azure province set aside his pride and see them off with such diligence. General Soren.
Ji Wangfei pulled her gaze back, tone offhand.
Once you leave Azure province, can you still protect us?
Inside the carriage, Azure kept her eyes shut. The image of sleep, her voice came out flat, cool as ice clicking against water.
He isn't a cultivator who nurtures a yin spirit.
The words landed, the ambient noise around them dropped, leaving only that faint, cool last syllable shivering in the frozen air. The carriage curtains swayed, light and shadow wavered. The knowing smile on Ji Wangfei's elegant face deepened. This time she didn't lower the curtain. She let her gaze drift to the figure in profound armor astride his horse.
We have put you to quite a lot of trouble, young General Soren.
Ji Wangfei need not stand on ceremony.
Soren dipped his chin, his tone balanced, neither crawling nor sharp.
He'd come to the capital for his reward. Escort duty was the last thing he'd planned on. If they encountered fiends beyond Azure's power, well, his ebony blade might feel unwieldy at his hip. But the wandering wind art honed to its absolute limit hadn't been cultivated for decoration.
Nelav Jiang spurred his horse forward from the rear. His gaze flicked between the carriage and Soren, excitement burning in his eyes. Hooves crushed gravel in a crisp, sharp staccato. Under the guidance of these two, how could Azure Province's rising generation fail to unseat the fossils? He edged his horse closer and lowered his voice.
General Soren, have you thought about what kind of treasured artifact you'd choose?
Soren mulled it. His eyes dropped to the ebony blade at his side.
Best if it's a weapon that fits my hand. That blade, pulled from the ape demon's corpse, held nothing beyond solidity and a sharp edge. No deeper mysteries. Every time he used it, it felt more like an empty husk.
Nelav Jiangxi filed that away, then spoke with open envy.
Azure Province ranks middling among the 9 continents of Daxian. Even White Cloud Abbey only dabbles in artifact refining. The reward artifacts granted by the Imperial Court, nearly all of them, come from Li-Zhou-Qi, richest of the great continents, the sect most skilled at smelting artifacts.
He leaned in slightly.
The gear we use at the 12 domains, their standards would call it middling at best. Rumor says their sect-defining treasure, a peerless artifact of the highest tier, can make even a primordial chaos grandmaster admit he's outmatched.
Soren's expression turned thoughtful. His mind went to the azure jade sword sealed within the silver bell token.
What tier did that one fall under?
Inside the carriage, Azure opened her eyes. Her gaze drifted without intent to the ebony blade at Soren's waist. The faint sheen of the scabbard cut across her pupils, cold keen like a blade's kiss. A breath later, she shut her eyes again, lashes settling soft as a sword, sliding silent into its sheath. The 8-horned demon steeds harnessed to the carriage stirred clouds beneath their hooves, galloping swift, steady. A journey that would take ordinary demon steeds 3 months, they swallowed in 19 days. The horses handpicked by the Demon Suppression Division strained madly to keep pace, still fell behind. Ji Wangfei detached 2 of the horned steeds, her smile all gracious warmth.
Young General Soren has earned his laurels. Prince Ji holds heroes like you in high regard. Enough with the formalities.
Nelav Jiangxi took the reins, dazed with a surreal sort of gratitude. riding the prince's manor's finest horses, when a heaven-sent talent stood in front of you. Even the rules of etiquette stepped aside. Day 19. The towering city walls surged into view. The gate, far vaster than anything in Azure province, rose in massive black stone, ancient and heavy enough to choke the breath. Blade scars and axe marks raked the battlements, every gouge steeped in 1,000 years of killing intent. The guards stood rigid and wired tight. Even without the chi sight technique, the auras here struck like a wall. This was Da Qing, the city that commanded all 9 continents. The carriage slipped through the gate. 8 snow, white-horned horses moved through the mist, as city guards met them with solemn, practiced deference, eyes tracking until the carriage vanished at the end of the long street. Soren's profound armor cut a harsh line against that ancient stone, his young silhouette set against centuries of blood and history, all the sharper for it. Ji Wangfu stood in the city's west. The manor's carved beams and painted rafters hurled their splendor in a wave jade tiles, towering walls, silk banners. Servants spilled into the street in 2 silent lines, heads bowed, clearing the path. Ji Wangfei turned to Azure, her eyes curving softly.
Chulan, why not stay in the prince's manor and keep this consort company for a spell?
Many thanks, Ji Wangfei.
Azure shook her head, her voice flat as a mill pond.
I serve the Demon Suppression Division. The Martial Temple suits me better.
She stepped through the gate. The front courtyard of Ji Wangfu was a forest of silk. Scores of women in luxuriant robes stood in utter silence. All ages, everyone striking. The rustle of brocade seemed to thicken the air into something close to gel. Nilav Jiangseg's fingers tightened on Soren's profound armor vambrace, trembling. His throat bobbed. He'd heard the prince's manor swarmed with consorts, but this living wall of beauties froze the spit in his mouth, every other bloodline long dead or sent away. The true master of this place could only be the woman with the gentle smile. Ji Wangfei's gaze swept the crowd, one small cough tiny, yet like a blade slitting silk, cut every subtle stir. The princesses parted, embroidered shoes hissing back like a tide. From the gap slipped a thin figure, pale, delicate, a stain of dark cyan sickness pooled between his brows. His robe of the same deep hue shimmered with every tremble, as if he'd dissolve into the light. The air Chen Jiang Blight.
Ching-chiu.
Ji Wangfei's lips smiled, but the corner of her eye gave a tiny spasm.
Your mother consort traveled to Azure province to bring you a martial tutor, the renowned Lady Azure. Come, pay your respects.
Her tone was honeyed. The fingers inside her sleeve curled white. Servants and princesses alike kept their gazes down. None dared look at that ink-robed figure standing in the heart of the splendor. Azure wore no paint, no jewels, just a simple black robe. She stood there like an invisible longsword, cleaving the gaudy world in 2. Her face, under the pale skylight, was so cold, and still it shamed the air itself. The frail youth raised his eyes. His throat worked. One short breath of hesitation, then he stepped forward. That tiny step unwound the knot in Ji Wangfei's chest. She exhaled slow. The air clasped his hands, dark sleeve hiding the tremble in his fingers.
Lady Azure.
Azure shook her head, voice like spring water over pebbles.
The air may dispense with formalities.
The child is just shy.
Ji Wangfei's smile stretched fresh, her soft tone threaded with a frayed, pleading edge.
Give her time to warm to you.
Off to the side, the silver bell token at Soren's waist pulsed a silent message. He stood in profound armor beside a pillar, his chill carapace gleaming, the hem of his crimson mantle carving a stark line across the flagstones, a sharp cut through all that glitter. Soren's gaze was distant, his mind a single flat thought. He wanted the core condensation method, and fast.
Nothing else mattered. Simple logic. If Azure refused, who in Azure province could force her? She was here. What was there to fuss about?
The wind died. Prince Chang clenched his fists and lifted his eyes toward them. Chill armor, crimson mantle, not a ripple on the young man's brow.
May I ask this general?
He saluted, then stumbled, hurrying to add,
I am Chen Jingjiang. Might I know the general's name?
Before the words had fully fled, Ji Wangfei's eye twitched again. Her foot slid forward, a feather scrape on bluestone, and she slipped cleanly between them. Her smile was all warmth, but her eyes held something stretched near to snapping.
This is General Soren of Azure Province. He has official matters at the Martial Temple and must not be delayed. Don't trouble him, dear.
Soren caught the cue. He cupped his fists, armor clanking deep. His voice was level.
I have urgent duties. I beg the princess consort's forgiveness.
Duty first, General Soren. Please go as you please.
G. Wang Fei's nod was all generous understanding, her smile fixed in place. Soren turned, his cloak snapping once, and strode for the palace gates. Nalav Jiangxi kept twisting her neck, staring back at Lord Azure, her head practically tying itself in a knot. Soren hauled her forward. The silver bell token chimed crisp and bright, and his armored hand clamped onto her shoulder with no room for argument. Deep in the courtyard, Azure watched them go, her pale hand inside her sleeve clenched until the knuckles cracked like thin ice. Her eyes, two iron spikes, drove into the retreating slash of crimson and did not let go. Outside the prince's manor, Nalav Jiang's jaw locked. The words tore through her teeth.
High Marshal Valerius. How could she do this?
Azure Province's keenest blade, and they waste her on a marriage alliance. She hurried after Soren, cursing low.
Damned.
But Soren had already veered off track, striding in entirely the wrong direction.
General Soren. Wrong way.
The martial temple stood on the nearest street to the imperial palace. Soren halted, looking up. Two pillars of priceless timber over 30 jong tall and translucent as amber held up a vast hall, its double-eaved roof crouched like the spine of some ancient beast. Light filtered through the precious wood, warm as honey. Soren had seen towering structures in his past life, but even his pupils tightened. Nalav Jiang said nothing more, just led the way inside. The temple's interior was stripped bare. All eyes were pulled to the high altar at the far end. 6'3" jong-gilded statues flanked it, faces twisted and ferocious. Yaksha with gaping maws, beast-headed human things, even the visage of a lion camel fiend. 12 such gilded figures clustered around a central 6, Jang Arhat. Its eyes were wrathful, its colossal body swam in shadow, looking down on everything. The air hung heavy as molten iron. Soren stared upward, dazed, spirit drifting, not awe. With the Mountain Lord's divine eye, he saw it, a coiled spectral form within that 6 Jang statue. Something alive.
Don't stare too long.
Nalab Jiangxi's voice dropped to a hush, her head still bowed.
These are all spirit transformation cultivators from the Ching-chiu era.
Beyond martial immortal came spirit transformation. Condense a martial phantom with incense faith power, abandon the flesh, merge the yin spirit into the phantom, and become a living god. As long as the yin spirit held and the incense burned, they endured 10,000 years.
The one in the center, that's Da Qinchao's supreme treasure. The golden Arhat's Dharma aspect.
Soren's pupils snapped tight. The Arhat's wrathful bronze eyes moved, a fraction slow, deliberate, a hum barely a whisper of air from its chest, like the shallow breath of a sleeping giant. The air froze, bugs in amber.
If he could get his hands on one of these, killing fiends would get a whole lot easier.
A voice rang from outside the temple gates. A middle-aged man in a plain cotton tunic planted his feet. His words hit like a stone hurled onto ice, shattering the frozen stillness.
You two can come out now, more or less.
Nalav Jiangxi bowed with careful precision toward the middle-aged man, then motioned Soren to follow. The instant they stepped past the martial temple's threshold, the daylight hit like a hammer, wrapping the profound armor in a sheet of cold light.
These are the hand-picked elites from every province and commandery.
Nalav Yang murmured, his voice barely above a breath.
Some are imperial kinsmen from the capital, but once they're initiated, they're all just disciples here.
He lifted a hand toward the two structures flanking the Grand Hall. Demon Hunters on the left, Demon Suppression Division on the right. A dry, stale mix of ink and rust hung in the air. A few deputy generals from the Demon Suppression Division clocked the profound armor and Soren's absurdly young face. They swapped a look, then eased aside without a word.
General, after you.
Over on the left, the Demon Hunters had barely started to smirk, lips just beginning to curl. When Soren shook his head,
No need.
he turned. The armor's backlight cut a hard outline, his cloak cracking open with a deep, galloping roar as he walked straight into the Demon Hunter's magistracy. The Demon Suppression deputies froze. One of them couldn't help it. His mouth twitched upward.
Go on.
He said, quietly.
Keep laughing.
The Demon Hunters' faces puckered. But before any retort could leave their mouths, a woman's voice exploded from inside the magistracy.
10 times?
Every sneer died right there. They forgot to mock and rushed in. Nelav Jiangji placed the gilt-edged dossier on the table. The woman across from him stared at the list of accomplishments, her finger tracing the characters before pausing.
What? Did the rest of Azure Province's demon hunters retire early?
She let out a sigh, thumb rubbing the parchment.
10. Martial temple baptisms.
Behind her, the demon hunters wore open astonishment. Scraping together a single one was a riddle that went unanswered for years. He'd brought 10, baptism or a long bath.
Fine. I'll get it done as fast as possible.
She said with a clipped nod.
Wait.
Nalav Jiangxi held up a hand.
First, get General Soren a copy of the heaven-devouring elixir scripture.
The woman's recovered poise drained away again. Her fingers slid to a line of cramped script, slain the core formation realm Whiteheart Lord. She lifted her eyes to Soren, who stood waiting without a flicker of impatience. The profound armor gave off a chill, his face as unreadable as still water. She let out a breath, rubbed her temples, turned, and went to fetch it. The archive's hinges groaned, dry and rasping, spilling out the scent of old paper and ink. The demon hunters around them, now realizing this young demon, Suppression Grand General, still needed the core condensation method, traded disbelieving glances. Several opened their mouths and promptly shut them. Soren's face stayed like carved stone, deflecting every stare behind the armor's barrier. The woman came back holding a brick-thick volume, its cover rough as rawhide. She set it on the table with a thud.
General Soren, please stay at the Martial Temple for now. Once you're ready, I'll arrange your baptism whenever you like.
Thank you.
Soren took the scripture, the coarse texture solid against his palm. The lodgings were tucked behind the Martial Temple. The central courtyard saw sparse foot traffic, people in plain long robes, cloth shoes, none of them bothering to leash their spiritual auras. A quick scan told Soren they were mostly core formation martial artists. A few more than in Azure province, but nothing remarkable. Nalav Jiangxi led him left, through a gate whose dry hinges let out a sharp squeal. The rooms inside were decent enough, but a thin layer of dust coated everything, the air stale with emptiness.
Make do.
Nalav Jiang said, sweeping 2 rooms clean with a pulse of chi.
Most collect their rewards and vanish. Only the ones waiting for baptism stick around a few days.
It's fine. I'm not exactly picky.
Soren pushed open the door, light pouring in, dust motes hanging in the shaft. He sat at the table, laid the scripture flat. The cover hit with a blunt thump. He opened to the first page, the paper crackling. Then his expression locked up. Tiny, dense script. He knew every character, but strung together, they read like a cipher from the heavens. He turned the pages, each one tightening the tendons in his hands. In the silence, the whisper of paper became a quiet, dragging torment. He reached the final page.
Core formation. Rare. Heaven. Devouring elixir scripture. Uninitiated.
Another rare technique. Not like the body tempering celestial demon 9 metamorphoses. This was a true inner cultivation art. Outside, the gilded shadow of the Martial Temple crept across the floor, slowly climbing Soren's torso. He let out a breath. His mind opened, and the vast fiend's life force flooded the interface like a dam breaking. Veins pulsed, minutely, at his temples. The text on the page roiled and churned. A thick wave of nausea pushed up his throat. The interface rippled.
Year 1. You open the heaven-devouring elixir scripture, grasping its meaning word by word. You're far from the clueless layman you once were. Year 2. You nod to yourself, cleverly deciding to skip the parts that make no sense, and turn to the second page.
Time spiraled into chaos.
Year 234. Endless confusion sieges your mind. You start to doubt you're even cut out for cultivation.
Soren's eyes snapped wide, pupils shrinking to pinpoints. Cold sweat slid from his hairline, a metallic tang surging up his throat. He forced it down with a hard swallow, closed his eyes, steadied his breathing. When he looked again, 2 centuries of lifespan had left him with nothing but a head full of questions and shattered dead ends. A faint frown creased his brow. He gathered the scarlet fiend's life force to push again. At the courtyard gate, a silent tide of ink, black, crossed the threshold. Azure stepped into the yard. The hem of her dark robe swept the bluestone, carrying a chill sharp as frost. Locust leaves in the corner shuddered. Even the steam curling from Nalav Jiang's teapot seemed to waver.
Lord Azure, what brings you here?
Nalav Jiangxi jolted upright, nearly fumbling the pot. Azure's face stayed calm, but her voice came soft, almost cautious.
The princess consort is arranging a banquet for the young heir's achievement. She invites you both to dinner tomorrow evening. Prince Ji will be returning to the residence as well.
Nalav Jiangxi's expression flickered.
The princess consort is inviting me?
Azure shook her head.
Not her, the young heir.
She glanced toward the house, toward Soren at the table, and walked inside. Nalav Jiang stood there, wanting to ask more, but Azure had already seated herself opposite Soren. She moved without a sound, only her fingertip tapped once on the cover of the heaven, devouring elixir scripture. Tap. A clean, startling rap that echoed faintly through the room.
If there's something you don't understand, ask me.
Her gaze lowered to the yellowed pages. A sharp glint flashed in Soren's eyes. He'd gotten used to the brutish, fumbling path of Fiend martial arts, and almost forgotten the biggest advantage of a cultivator's method. A trail already blazed by others. Right here sat a core formation expert, her presence as still as a deep pool. Soren didn't waste time on pleasantries. He stripped the tangled mess in his head into sharp, precise questions, and fired them off, one after another. Azure listened in silence. The time it takes half an incense stick to burn passed, and Soren's questions kept coming. A flicker of surprise stirred inside her impossibly clear eyes. She'd only lingered at the prince's residence a few extra hours, not months, hours. Yet Soren had already dug this deep into the heaven, devouring elixir scripture. With comprehension like that, no wonder he'd rattled Jiang Eon's pride, and a jade liquid secret art within days.
That covers it.
Soren said, finally catching his breath, and taking the hot tea na la fiang shi handed him to ease his throat. Azure let the silence stretch for a few breaths, then lifted the book. Her pale fingertips settled on the vertical script, tracing the ink lines with a slow, deliberate glide. Soren's eyes followed like a blade locked on a target. Fixed on every inch, her finger moved. Her voice came clear and cold, cutting through the text sentence by sentence. Off to the side, Nalav Jiangxi refilled the tea, his gaze slowly going vacant. He forced his face into a solemn mask and nodded, now and then, just to keep up appearances. Soren's head snapped up.
Break that down further.
Across Azure's fine features, a rare flicker of strain surfaced.
I've given you everything I have.
Soren understood. He didn't push. Chewing iron slag was easier than digesting iron nails. After all, he seared every word of her analysis into memory, then shut his eyes. A thought stirred. The Scarlet Fiend's lifespan flooded the panel once more. His six senses plunged inward, his chi sea churning. Each time Soren opened his eyes from that deep focus, he fired off a fresh round of questions. Some were so basic, they caught her off guard. Yet with just a short explanation from Azure, he'd chew on it for a moment, and then spin out an entire logical chain. His new questions knifing straight toward the deeper thresholds. Deep in Soren's eyes, sparks of realization detonated with every epiphany. Inside his chi sea, a current battered against the levee. Azure sat motionless across from him. The lake surface that had lain still in her heart for years rippled again and again, startled into waves. This man lacked the most basic cultivation foundations, yet he bulldozed forward on raw, heaven-sent comprehension alone. Azure studied Soren's focused profile in silence, intensely curious about the very wiring of that brain of his. Time bled away without a sound. Soren stirred one last time. Inside his pitch-black eyes, a flash of spiritual light erupted, like a blade ripping free of its sheath. 679 years, the heaven-devouring elixir scripture was fully grasped, and Soren finally understood the heaven-devouring inner core this method produced. The gulf between it and an ordinary inner core was so monstrous it defied reason. A tiny vortex began to coalesce inside his kosi. Soren was attempting to condense his core. Nalav Jiangxi had just brewed a fresh pot of tea. He glanced up to see Azure rising slowly and asked, baffled,
Lord Azure, why stop the lesson now?
Azure looked at Soren with a tangled expression, her eyes traveling down to the pitch-black, long saber at his waist. The cloud-patterned scabbard, mottled and worn, bore lines she knew far too well. She then stared out toward the far horizon, the depths of her eyes churning with things sealed away for far too long. After a moment, she pulled her gaze back, her voice slightly hoarse.
Once you receive your new sacred armament, would you give that saber to me?
Soren lifted his eyes, a trace of doubt threading through them.
I'd like to keep it as a memento.
Azure's explanation came out in a whisper, like someone who had never asked another person for anything. Crack! A sharp explosion of shattering porcelain tore the stillness apart. The teapot smashed from Nilavjiang's hands, shards flying. A thin, razor-edged fragment whined through the air. Boiling tea spread across the floor, dark and dense as spilled ink. Nilavjiang stood rooted, his face a picture of shock, pupils quaking. Azure startled, then caught the ambiguity in her own words. She pressed her lips together, on the verge of speaking but holding back. Soren had already removed the ink saber and set it on the table. The blade met the wooden surface with a deep, heavy thud, sinking into the sudden silence as fine dust rose from the seams of the scabbard.
Was this your old friend's?
Soren's voice stayed even. That veiled glance Azure had feigned nonchalance to sweep over his waist when they met in that ruined temple. Those reminiscing looks she sometimes cast, and the way General Yu had once stared so long at this blade, none of that had ever slipped past Soren's eyes. He simply hadn't cared to mention it. Azure froze for a heartbeat, then nodded softly. Just as expected, this man not only caught her intent, he could see straight through the most ambiguous words to their true meaning with a single look. Soren hung the ebony blade back at his waist.
It's not urgent. Once I've got the new one, I'll hand it over.
A new sacred armament might not handle as smoothly right away. Azure only wanted a keepsake. There was no rush.
Thank you.
Azure seemed deeply appreciative of this clipped exchange. No need for drawn-out explanations, no need to show any emotion at all. Nilav Zhang stood in the wreckage of porcelain, his expression barely better than when he'd been listening to an incomprehensible scripture.
No, how had they recognized it as an old friend's possession?
Azure strode toward the door, pausing on the threshold.
Arrange the martial temple tempering as soon as possible. Don't fuss over anything else.
The words fell, and the ink-robed figure was already inside the neighboring room, the door clicking softly shut. Soren glanced sideways at Nilav Zhangxi.
What is the martial temple? Tempering?
Nilav Zhang's spirit lifted, solid ground at last. He didn't bother asking Soren why he'd suddenly brought it up, just launched into a rapid explanation.
Martial temple tempering is taking the golden body a divine transformation cultivator leaves behind after death and swallowing it like a precious elixir. You extract a tiny wisp of its aura. Let it course through the body for about 10 breaths. Those with superior aptitude can retain 60%.
He paused, his tone dropping lower.
I needed 2 sessions just to condense the embryonic core. After 6 more temperings, I'm still a step short of completing core condensation. But your core condensation method and mine aren't the same. This can only serve as a reference.
Hearing this, Soren felt a thread of relief. Lucky that Azure had cut him off earlier. If he'd truly leaned on Fiend's lifespan to ram his cultivation upward, he'd have mindlessly burned through several more centuries. Heaven and earth had always been miserly. The cultivation path ran on plunder. The essence of martial temple tempering just shifted the target of that plunder from fiends and precious elixirs to fallen high realm cultivators. Nilav Zhang swept the porcelain debris from the floor with a wave of chi. His gaze complicated as he looked over.
So you really followed all of that? You don't need another pass?
No need.
Soren said, closing the panel. 679 years. No matter how brutal the sky, devouring pill absorption was, it was still just a core condensation method. Soren had long since burned the entire art into memory. Only the final accumulation of cultivation remained. He shut his eyes, the enormous scripture cascading through his thoughts. This core condensation method, hailed as foremost in all Da Shen, had a single advantage: speed. It nurtured a ravenous heaven, devouring Dao infant at the swiftest possible pace. No need to worry about mixed auras. No need to stress over improper nurturing. It accepted everything, raw or refined. That was exactly why it could stomach violent, fiendish energy. But the greedier the Dao infant, the more savage and ungovernable it became. That was why the sun-forged treasure furnace had to suppress it, and then one's divine sense had to overwrite its consciousness. Only then could the primordial chaos Wuji be reached. Soren opened his eyes, thoroughly killing any thought of acquiring another golden body martial phantom. Divine sense could only anchor in one place. If he gave it to the Dao infant, he couldn't also bestow it upon a yin spirit. To split a soul in two, that was a madman's move. He stared out at the towering martial temple beyond the hall. In that moment, his fingertip twitched. The panel unfurled, lines of text slamming into his eyes.
Fiend's origin can reshape a fiend's soul to serve at one side, enslaved for all eternity, never to transcend, enduring every torment of the world, to guard its master's supreme dharma.
To guard its master's supreme dharma.
Soren repeated the line silently. He drew a long, slow breath. A daring notion crystallized in his mind. The next day, Nilav Zhangse had already smoothed things over with the demon hunter's magistracy. Faced with a demon, suppressing general determined to undergo 10 consecutive temperings, even their administrative efficiency quickened by a third. Before the martial temple, 4 cyan-robed figures materialized in silence. The 4 elders all wore aged faces and carried heavy, stagnant auras, as if half their bodies were already buried in yellow earth. They stepped slowly into the hall, their gazes dropping onto the profound armor, clad youth already seated cross-legged beneath the 13 golden bodies. The lead elder lifted a hand slightly. Thick, white mist gushed from the 4 men's palms like living creatures, slithering up the pillars to drown the beams in an instant. The light plunged into gloom. The silhouettes of the 13 golden bodies flickered inside the churning fog, their visages sliding between clarity and shadow, eerie and unreadable.
Sit cross-legged. Hold your breath. Focus your spirit.
Soren was already on the cushion. This position sat exactly where the gazes of all the golden body martial phantoms converged. The yaksha's face was twisted, fangs bared. The lion Camel crouched low, claws gouging the ground. A beast-faced, human-bodied martial phantom gripped golden awls in both hands, posed to drive them home. But what truly seized Soren's attention was the 6 Jiang Arhat golden body in the very center. Coiling fog churned around it. The Arhat's wrathful eyes shifted. The eyeballs turned with agonizing slowness, yet unmistakably. Caked golden powder sifted from the rims of the eye sockets, falling into the mist in utter silence. Soren steadied his heart, no mistake. Among the 13 golden bodies crouching in the gloom, this one Arhat alone was still alive.
Do not allow your mind to wander.
The cyan-robed elder's voice cut sharp with severity. For a martial artist of the 9 provinces, the martial temple tempering was a rare stroke of destiny's grace. To fritter it away through an unsettled mind, that was a regret you carried to the grave. As his words fell, the 4 men formed hand seals in perfect unison. Veins bulged along withered knuckles. The seals shifted, and the air hummed low. Within the Arhat's wrathful eyes, a thread of murky spiritual light finally gathered. Consciousness clawing its way out of a boundless slumber with agonizing effort. It turned its head. The movement was excruciating. Golden lacquer at its neck cracked, splitting with faint pops. The Arhat's gaze settled on the first Yaksha statue, to its right. In that sliver of a heartbeat, the Yaksha's face warped hideously, like living flesh being flayed and drained of marrow. A piercing golden light was ripped bodily from the martial phantom. It tore through the air, trailing like a dragon, and slammed ferociously into the crown of Soren's skull. Veins of dark gold rippled like magma across the surface of the profound armor, flaring and vanishing in the same breath. Astral winds churned of their own accord. Dust on the floor was ground into concentric rings, spreading outward layer by layer. The 4 elders silently counted the time. 10 breaths, gone in a flash. They lifted their gazes in unison, waiting for the golden light to leave his body and return to the golden form. Soren sat motionless. On the profound armor, not a single wisp of aura seeped out. It was as though that golden light had never existed. Soren deliberately waited, an extra breath before speaking.
We can continue.
A warm current saturated his entire body, blissful to the extreme. His inner heaven devouring core condensed madly under the nurturing of that towering aura. The eyelid of one cyan-robed elder twitched violently. He exchanged glances with the other 3. Within those 4 pairs of murky old eyes flickered a trace of disbelief. Was this youth a pixie made flesh, taking all in and letting nothing out? They spoke no further. The seals formed once more. The Arhat golden body stirred again. Its weighty gaze shifted to the second martial phantom. After the Yaksha came a Vajra statue, pestle in hand and glaring with fury. The golden light was wrenched out again, thicker than before, dragging a searing contrail through midair as it slammed viciously into the top of Soren's head. The lava, like veins on the profound armor, blazed once more. The air around him warped faintly from the heat. 10 breaths. Without rest, the 3rd beam of golden light surged in. Soren sank into inner vision. Within his chi-si, the phantom silhouette of the sun-forged treasure furnace hung directly overhead, revolving slowly. Beneath it, a core pill as white as jade swelled at a pace visible to the naked eye. Every stream of golden light that poured in firmed the pill's shell. Fine glyphs bloomed gradually across its surface, flickering and flowing like living things.
This drain, it matches what 10 ordinary tempering sessions would cost. What core condensation method is he cultivating? He still hasn't reached perfection.
One of the elders stared at the golden bodies. Their radiance was noticeably dimmed. Before he could finish speaking, the young man lifted his eyes again, urging them on.
Sky-devouring peel absorption.
Another sighed.
The demon-suppressing general from Azure province. Azure province again. Even stronger than the last one. I remember the girl could only retain 70%.
They spoke in low voices, but the hand seals never paused. 4th beam, the 5th, the 6th. Each time a beam of golden light left a body, that golden body dimmed by 3 full degrees. The mist in the hall churned more violently, shredded by the aftershocks of 9 consecutive beams. It howled between pillars and beams, low, sobbing echoes chasing each other through the dark, until the 9th beam poured in. Soren's body gave a subtle shudder. Inside him, the heaven-devouring core, pill solidified to absolute perfection. A profound, boundless force coursed unimpeded along his meridians, to every major acupoint, fusing into one seamless whole with his physical form. This was true core formation perfection. Nothing like the almost trickery realm of the heavenly demon outer pill. A majestic pressure burst outward from Soren's body. It shoved the surrounding mist back in a single wave. The 4 elders exhaled relief, their gazes falling upon the 9 dimmed golden bodies. Their expressions flickered, unsettled. Yet, Soren did not rise. He observed the scene within his chi-si with cold focus. The heavenly demon outer pill, which bore the full force of his cultivated power, was circling the flawless, pure, white heaven-devouring core pill in slow, wary arcs. It did not dare draw too close. It prowled the perimeter, emitting a faint ripple of aura, testing the waters. Soren's will stirred. The phantom of the sun-forged treasure furnace shuddered violently. An invisible suppression force crashed down. It slammed squarely onto the heavenly demon outer pill, hurtling it straight into the farthest edge of the chi-si. There it lay, still, silent. Only then did Soren open his eyes and rise slowly. The lingering golden radiance had yet to be reined in. It spilled like threads through the seams of his profound armor plates, gilding the floor as though with gold leaf.
I'll trouble you elders to store the rest for me. I'll bathe again next time.
His tone was courteous, easy. Comfortable as the golden light bath was, Soren was not wasteful enough to treat such karmic fortune as mere bathwater. The 4 elders formed seals to pull back the white mist at the entrance of the martial temple. The fog reversed, surging back into their palms like a tide. The great hall cleared in an instant. As they watched the young man walk out, one elder looked down at the veins, still bulging on the back of his seal, clasping hand. He said nothing. Outside the temple, Nilav Jiangxi came forward, surprised.
So fast. How does it feel?
She caught the look in Soren's eyes before he could fully restrain it. Golden light churned deep within his pupils, fierce and searing. Molten iron roiling inside a furnace. Soren stretched his frame. The motion was slight, almost lazy.
Possible.